Hey friends, imagine spending 12 years learning Latin just to argue over who owns a cow. Welcome to the chaotic, hilarious, and genuinely painful world of medieval lawyers. These were the people who tried to bring order to a time when half the population couldn't read, the other half believed in curses, and every contract was written on an actual sheet. And yet somehow, they kept civilization from collapsing. Mostly. While knights battled for glory and assassins lurked in the dark, lawyers fought their wars with ink and quills, buried in scrolls, court gossip, and clients who paid in chickens. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't noble, and it definitely sucked. So before we dive into the absurdity, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to the weird corners of history like this one. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing seeing who's tuning in from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, and let's ease into tonight's story, the parchment-stained, sanity-testing life of a medieval lawyer. Because in 14th century England, justice wasn't blind, it was just badly written. It's the year 1374 CE, and you've just decided to study law. You don't know it yet, but you've basically signed up for 12 years of Latin headaches, cold dormitories, and parchment burns. Forget glamorous courtroom speeches or gold leaf manuscripts. Most of your job will involve copying other people's complaints and pretending to understand the word jurisprudence. You arrive at the Inns of Court in London, one of 4 ancient institutions where future lawyers are allegedly trained. The place smells like old ale, tallow candles, and ambition. Every building leans a little to one side, like even the architecture can't stand the weight of legal precedent. You're handed a quill, a half-burned candle, and a book thicker than the average monk. That's your welcome package. Classes begin before sunrise. Your instructor is an aging clerk with ink permanently embedded under his fingernails. He doesn't so much speak English as gargle Latin and Norman French at the same time. Half the time, you're not sure whether he's quoting a statute or ordering lunch. Nota bene, he says, tapping the table with the stick. Which means, you whisper to the boy beside you, take note. He nods solemnly, then proceeds to fall asleep sitting upright. By mid-morning, everyone's parchment is spotted with drool and despair. Meals are taken communally in the hall. Bread, ale, and something that could be stew if you squint. You eat beside future judges, future clerks, and a few men who will soon quit to become professional gamblers. One of them tells you the real secret of success. Memorize everything, believe nothing. You write that down. It becomes the most useful legal principle of your career. The curriculum is simple. Read law, copy law, dream about law, and occasionally debate whether a goose counts as property or divine miracle. There are no printed textbooks, just handwritten scrolls chained to the desks. Every time you need to consult a source, you must petition the librarian, who guards them like relics of the saints. Sometimes, he actually blesses them. Examinations are worse. They're oral, in both senses. 10 senior lawyers surround you, firing questions in Latin while you sweat through your wool. Explain lex non scripta, one bellows. Unwritten law, you answer. He frowns. Then how do you know it exists? You consider fainting, but that would count as a confession of ignorance. Students practice mock trials called moots. These take place in dim chambers that smell of candle wax and panic. You argue imaginary cases about real cows, which is fitting because half your audience is chewing grass out of boredom. Victory depends entirely on how long you can talk without contradicting yourself. In this way, the English legal system is born. At night, you copy charters until your eyes blur. Each letter must be perfect. One slip of the quill could turn grant into grief. And parchment isn't cheap, it's sheepskin. You quickly learn that the law, like the sheep, bleeds for its principles. The lectures emphasize decorum. A lawyer must be eloquent yet humble, confident yet silent until spoken to, which means you spend most days being told to speak up and shut up simultaneously. Somewhere between those commands, you develop your first ulcer. Money is always tight. Fees for tuition, robes, and candle wax pile up like unpaid debts. To afford it all, you moonlight as a copyist for local merchants. They pay in coin if you're lucky, in salted fish if you're not. Either way, your hands never stop cramping. You learn quickly that law isn't about justice, it's about memory. Who remembers which custom applies to which county? Who remembers which lord once claimed ownership of which bridge? The truly powerful aren't the nobles. They're the men who remember things no one else can read. Every so often, a guest lecturer from the royal courts visits. He struts in wearing velvet sleeves and the smugness of a man who actually gets paid. He begins every story with, "When I was at Westminster," and ends it with, "And then the king agreed." You suspect neither part is true. Outside the classroom, London is loud, filthy, and full of distraction. Hawkers shout, carts rattle, beggars sing hymns off-key. But inside the inns, everything is ritual. Bells mark the hours. Candles mark the progress of your sanity. If you burn through wax too fast, it's assumed you're studying hard or crying. After 6 years, you start to think in Latin. You mutter phrases like sin die, without day, when you forget your schedule. Friends stop inviting you to taverns because you keep citing the Magna Carta at bartenders. The library becomes your only friend. Stacks of parchment rise around you like defensive walls. You grow pale from candlelight, soft from sitting, and develop an allergy to fresh air. Other students compare ink stains like battle scars. The darkest one wins respect. Sometimes, in your exhaustion, you imagine the law itself as a living creature, a many-headed dragon that feeds on ink and paperwork. Each head speaks a different dialect of Latin, and all of them disagree. Your job is not to slay it. Your job is to quote it accurately. Finally, after 12 years of this academic purgatory, your instructor announces you're ready. No ceremony, no diploma. He simply says, "You may now plead." You wait for applause. There isn't any. Everyone's too busy arguing over goose rights again. You step out into the London air, blinking at the sun like a mole seeing daylight for the first time. Behind you, the bells of the inns toll in Latin. At least they sound like it. You're now a lawyer. Congratulations. All it cost you was your youth, your eyesight, and a small mountain of parchment. You take a deep breath, ready to defend truth, honor, and justice. Then you remember your first assignment, a landlord suing his tenant for using too much shadow in the courtyard. And so, parchment still warm beneath your arm, you head toward the courthouse. You can already hear the bells of Westminster and the faint murmur of monks debating morality next door. Soon, you'll discover that the only thing worse than learning the law is trying to practice it. The first thing you learn about working in the courts is that no one knows where they actually are. Every few months, the king moves them to a new location so he can collect fees from a different town. You spend most of your early career chasing judges down muddy roads, clutching scrolls like holy relics. When someone says, "The law travels," they mean it literally. You finally arrive at Westminster Hall, the beating heart of English justice, and the world's largest indoor argument. It smells like sweat, parchment, and roasted meat from the market stalls that share the same space. Half the population of London seems to be here, all shouting over each other in the name of order. The sound is like a choir of geese trying to explain property law. You set up your first case before the royal bench. It's a dispute between two farmers over who owns a single cow. Both men insist the cow knows them personally. You're representing the one who says he raised it from birth, though you suspect the cow raised itself. The judge listens for an hour before falling asleep. When he wakes, he announces that neither man owns the cow. The church does, because the cow once wandered into a monastery courtyard. The monks cheer quietly. You make a note to study theology. It seems to pay better. After court, you learn that lawyers are paid by the word. This explains everything. Documents are so long, they require their own wheelbarrows. Every whereas, heretofore, and aforesaid adds a little more silver to the purse. You briefly consider writing your grocery lists in legal style, just to feel important. The courtroom hierarchy is brutal. Sergeants, barristers, clerks, scribes. It's like a food chain made entirely of ink. At the bottom are the apprentices like you, fetching documents and occasionally a roast chicken for the senior lawyers. On bad days, the judges throw quills at you. On good days, they throw insults instead. There's no jury as you'd expect it. Juries are often chosen from the same village as the accused and bribed with ale before noon. A man once confessed to stealing his own cart just to get home early. The court accepted the plea. Efficiency, apparently, counts as virtue. Witnesses don't swear on the Bible, they swear on saints' relics, which can be anything from a bone fragment to what might be a chicken feather. One man swears on the finger of St. Cuthbert, though it's clearly a bit of leftover dinner. No one argues. You're starting to realize truth in law is whatever doesn't get laughed out of the room. When disputes involve the church, things get complicated. Clergy can only be tried in ecclesiastical courts, which means half the accused simply claim to be monks. Beards appear overnight. Everyone suddenly knows a psalm by heart. You defend one man who recites half a verse before sneezing and losing his immunity. He's fined for blasphemy and bad timing. You develop small tricks to survive. Speak slowly, even when you're wrong. It makes stupidity sound like wisdom. Use Latin when you forget the English. Bow to everyone, especially the bailiff's dog, and never, ever sit down before the judge does. The clients are the real challenge. Most can't read. Many can't count. All of them believe divine intervention will solve their case before you do. One woman asks if God can be subpoenaed. You say yes, but his retainer fee is steep. Bribes are the grease that keeps everything moving. Coin passes under tables like mice in a pantry. If the judge's hand twitches, it means he's ready for payment. If both hands twitch, he's doubling the fee. Sometimes justice happens by accident. A thief once tripped in court and confessed mid-fall. A noble fainted after reading his own will aloud. A priest was acquitted because everyone agreed his handwriting was too holy to fake. You start to think maybe the system works precisely because no one understands it. The paperwork never ends. Every ruling requires 3 copies, each written by candlelight. By the time you finish one case, your fingertips are black with soot. You smell like a bonfire made of sheep. When the ink runs out, you use wine. When the wine runs out, you pray. Evenings are spent drinking with other lawyers who argue recreationally. They debate everything from divine law to whether onions count as vegetables or sins. You lose most of these arguments, but gain the valuable skill of sleeping through lectures the next morning. One night, you meet a judge who claims he can predict verdicts by examining the alignment of ink stains on a clerk's sleeve. He's usually right. You consider converting to whatever religion that is. As years pass, you learn that the courts are less about truth and more about stamina. The last man still speaking usually wins. Sometimes the opposing lawyer drops mid-sentence and the judge simply declares, "Victory by survival." You've started training your lungs accordingly. By 1378, you're a seasoned professional. You own 2 robes, 5 quills, and a growing sense of disillusionment. You can quote 50 precedents that no one cares about. You can also fall asleep standing up, a skill every lawyer eventually acquires. You've begun to notice that even the clerks whisper jokes about justice being a performance with better hats. They're not wrong. Every trial feels like theater. Tragedy for the poor, comedy for the rich. You play your part, bow on cue, and try not to choke on your own dignity. Sometimes, while waiting hours for a judge to appear, you stare at the cathedral spire across the square and wonder if divine judgment is any faster. Then the bailiff shouts your name, and you're back inside, knee-deep in parchment and shouting. Law is a strange religion, one that demands faith, payment, and infinite patience. And somehow, despite everything, you still believe you can make it work. It's 1379 now, and you've been summoned to handle your first major countryside dispute. A simple case, they said. Just property lines and a stolen cow. It turns out nothing involving cows is ever simple. You travel for 2 days through mud, rain, and the constant smell of manure until you reach the manor of Lord Beecham. The villagers greet you like an exotic bird, someone who can read, write, and still be dumb enough to come here voluntarily. The case begins in the local tavern because it's the only building large enough to fit everyone involved. Your opponent is the village reeve, a man who considers logic a personal insult. He claims the cow belongs to his cousin because it looked at him that way. You argue the cow's gaze isn't legal tender. He counters with a pitchfork. The crowd murmurs in approval of the pitchfork. You remember that in rural England, possession is not 9/10 of the law, it's 9/10 of the mob. You try to appeal to reason. Reason, however, didn't make the trip. You produce documents showing the cow's brand mark matches your client's herd. The reeve insists the mark is actually a divine symbol. He calls the local priest to testify. The priest confirms that yes, it could be the Virgin Mary or possibly a hoof print. Either way, it's miraculous. The villagers cheer. You take a long sip of ale and mentally draft your resignation. But then you notice something. The reeve's cousin has brought the cow into the tavern as evidence. It's chewing on the priest's robe. You point this out. The priest decides divine miracles don't usually eat wool. Case closed. You win, technically, but your client pays you in eggs and a promise to pray for your soul. You can't deposit either at the bank. Still, you add cow victory to your growing list of absurd professional milestones. Word spreads quickly that you're the man who defeated divine livestock. Within weeks, you're flooded with cases that make even less sense. A miller sues a river for changing direction. A widow wants to excommunicate her neighbor's rooster. Someone demands compensation for emotional distress caused by excessive wind. You realize the law doesn't just attract madness, it documents it. The local nobility treat trials like entertainment. They sit in judgment halls eating pears and betting on verdicts. When you object to the noise, one lord shouts, "Objection sustained," just to sound clever. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, mostly to stay employed. One case involves a farmer whose fence encroaches on church property by the width of one saint's finger. The bishop demands demolition. The farmer argues the saint in question was short. They compromise by exhuming the saint. You decide not to attend that hearing. By midsummer, you've become an expert in the art of losing gracefully. You can bow, smile, and thank the judge while mentally screaming. You've learned that in rural courts, logic travels slower than gossip and twice as painfully. Still, you keep showing up. That's what passes for heroism in your profession. Your nights are spent in drafty inns writing copies of depositions by candlelight. Each parchment curls at the edges, absorbing ale fumes and regret. Sometimes you wonder what normal people do after work. Then you remember they're probably suing each other too. You start keeping a ledger of the strangest cases. It's meant to help you track precedents, but mostly reads like medieval stand-up comedy. One entry simply says, "Case dismissed because chicken refused to testify." You underline it twice. When you return to London that winter, you bring with you a new skill. The ability to look interested in nonsense for 8 hours straight. This earns you promotion to the Royal Circuits, a travelling court that brings justice to the countryside, whether it wants it or not. You accept, thinking it will be an adventure. That's your first mistake. The Royal Circuits are less courts and more legal caravans of doom. Judges, clerks, guards, and lawyers, all crammed into wagons, bouncing over frozen ruts. Each stop means new petitions, new bribes, new fleas. It's justice by endurance. You share a wagon with a clerk who sleep talks in Latin and snores like a dying organ. By the third night, you've memorized entire charters against your will. By the fifth, you start responding in your sleep. Objection noted. The cases blur together. One man charged with heresy for sneezing during Mass. Another for fishing on a holy day because the fish looked Protestant. Every verdict feels like theater, and every sentence sounds like déjà vu. Sometimes you catch yourself laughing in the middle of trials, not at jokes, but at the absurdity of your own life. You used to dream of eloquent arguments and noble causes. Now, your greatest legal triumph is convincing a judge that a pig can't be held responsible for trespassing. You've won that case twice. But somewhere in all this madness, something changes. You start to admire the ordinary people who keep showing up. Farmers, widows, millers, all believing that somehow, through this tangled mess of parchment and prayer, justice might still peek through. Their faith humbles you. Their persistence shames you. You stop rolling your eyes quite so often. On the last night of circuit season, you watch a peasant win a small land dispute against a local baron. It's a rare victory, almost scandalous. The man kneels, crying, thanking God, the court, and even you. For a moment, you almost believe the system works. Then the bailiff fines him for weeping on royal carpet. Back to normal. When you return to London again, you're older, wiser, and poorer. The city feels smaller, noisier, and slightly more corrupt, though that might just be you. You hang up your mud-caked robes and tell yourself you've seen it all. You haven't. You fall asleep that night with ink-stained hands and a faint smell of sheet parchment. Somewhere in your dreams, a cow chews a priest's robe and winks at you knowingly. You laugh in your sleep. The law has officially gotten inside your head, and it isn't leaving. Now, in the year 1380, you've stopped panicking before every hearing. You've learned that panic is pointless when you're walking into chaos on purpose. You're summoned to represent a merchant accused of blasphemy for selling imported pepper during Lent. He swears it's not a sin, just capitalism. The bishop disagrees. The royal judge disagrees differently. This is your first case before both church and royal judges at once, a jurisdictional cage match between heaven and earth. Each side insists it alone has authority. Neither side remembers what the case was about. The royal judge claims anything bought with coin falls under the king's rule. The bishop claims all spices are holy because they appear in the Bible. You just want to go home. The argument lasts 3 days. At one point, a clerk accidentally quotes the wrong gospel, prompting a minor theological riot. Someone throws a candle. By the time the smoke clears, the only consensus is that pepper is suspiciously expensive. Your client is fined for tempting Christian nostrils. You're paid in cloves. You hate cloves. That's how you learn one of the great truths of medieval law. Nobody knows where the church ends and the kingdom begins. The two overlap like badly drawn circles. And wherever they overlap, you'll find lawyers getting crushed in between. Ecclesiastical courts handle sins, royal courts handle crimes, and occasionally, both handle you. You once defend a monk accused of hoarding relics. The church insists he's guilty of greed. The crown insists he's guilty of theft. The monk insists he's guilty of enthusiasm. He's sentenced to copy psalms until further notice. Another time, you're called to mediate between two abbeys, arguing over ownership of a single tooth. Both claim it belonged to the same saint. You suggest sawing it in half. They both accuse you of heresy. By now you've realized that divine law and royal law are less like opposites and more like siblings who share a room and hate each other. They steal each other's arguments and blame you when anything breaks. It's not theology, it's family drama with Latin subtitles. You attend joint trials where bishops and judges sit side by side, pretending not to loathe one another. The bishops glare at the lawyers for charging fees. The lawyers glare at the bishops for pretending not to. Everyone drinks from the same wine jug. No one admits who bought it. The next case could only happen in this century. A brewer accused of selling holy water ale. The church calls it sacrilege. The crown calls it innovation. You call it Exhibit A. During trial, a bishop demands the ale be destroyed. The royal judge demands a sample first. They compromise by drinking it together. By the end of the tasting, both claim jurisdiction and a mild headache. You discover that corruption, like grace, is available in both denominations. The bishop accepts donations. The judge accepts bribes. You're not sure there's a difference. One morning, you receive 2 letters on the same day. One sealed with wax, one with a cross. The first demands you appear before the king's bench for unpaid taxes. The second demands you appear before the church court for failure to tithe. Both hearings are scheduled for the same hour. You attend both. You spend the morning in the king's hall being accused of greed. You spend the afternoon in the bishop's chamber being accused of stinginess. by sunset, you've been absolved, fined, and blessed in that order. Later that month, you find yourself trapped in a full-blown theological standoff. A priest is charged with selling indulgences at half price, and both courts want to make an example of him. The king calls it fraud. The bishop calls it marketing. You call it Tuesday. The royal judge bangs his staff and demands that the priest swear fealty to the king. The bishop slams his crozier and demands he swear to God. The priest swears to both, then swears again out of frustration. You object on grounds of profanity. It's sustained and overruled simultaneously. By the end of the day, you've written 5 separate rulings, none of which agree with each other. The bishop keeps one. The judge keeps one. The priest takes the rest to wrap fish. That night, over ale with another exhausted advocate, you wonder aloud which side is worse. The church, he says, because you can appeal to the king. Then he pauses. Unless the king's in confession. You both laugh too hard for 2 men, 1 sentence away from excommunication. You start noticing how even the paperwork feels divided. Royal decrees written in hard Gothic script, sharp and absolute. Church records flowing like psalms, full of flourishes and guilt. You can tell which authority issued a writ just by how much ink it took to apologize for it. The bishops treat you with polite suspicion, like a talking animal that might sue them later. They smile, quote scripture, and then hand you a bill for candle wax. You start attending Mass regularly, not for salvation, but for networking. Meanwhile, the royal clerks are jealous of the church's power. They try to copy its prestige by introducing ritual. Now every session begins with a procession, a song, and the ceremonial dropping of a quill. You're not sure if it's satire or worship. In your quieter moments, you start questioning what any of it means. If divine law and royal law both claim perfection, why do they contradict each other every other week? If justice is holy, why does it need witnesses? If mercy is free, why does it cost so much parchment? You write these questions in the margins of your scrolls, then you erase them before submission. Skepticism doesn't pay well. One afternoon, you meet an old canon lawyer who's been practicing for 50 years. His hands shake from ink poisoning. He tells you, the law is like God's will, except everyone thinks they wrote it. You buy him an ale and pretend not to agree. Weeks later, you're summoned to mediate a dispute between a monastery and the royal mint. The monks claim the mint's hammering keeps interrupting their prayers. The mint claims the monks' prayers keep interrupting their hammering. You suggest alternating schedules. They accuse you of witchcraft. At the end of that summer, you stand outside Westminster again, watching the sun strike the spires of both cathedral and palace. 2 towers, 2 masters. You realize your entire profession exists in the shadow between them. It's not justice you serve, it's balance. And balance, as you've learned, always hurts. You walk home through narrow streets that smell of wax, rain, and unresolved lawsuits. In every window, a candle flickers behind parchment. Somewhere, someone's being fined for something they didn't do. You whisper a prayer, not for them, but for yourself. Tomorrow, you'll wake and do it all again. By the time autumn rolls around, you've started to recognize your clients before they even speak. They all wear the same expression, a blend of guilt, hope, and mild confusion about what you actually do. One morning, a farmer arrives at your chamber, clutching a sack of turnips in terror. He's being sued by his landlord for defamation of property. You ask what that means. He says he told the neighbors the landlord's barn looked sad. You try not to laugh, mostly because laughter counts as contempt of court. Instead, you take the case. It's not that you believe in justice. You just need the turnips. Clients like him make up half your practice. The other half are people with money and absolutely no sense of proportion. One noble woman demands to sue her tailor for insufficient elegance. A knight once hires you to prosecute his own reflection for looking smug. Both cases settle privately. Sometimes they bring gifts instead of payment. Chickens, candles, a live goose that won't stop screaming during testimony. You learn to accept it all. The law feeds you, but not in the way you expect it. The complaints themselves could fill a comedy play. One man claims his neighbor's shadow crossed his field without permission. Another demands damages because a monk's sermon made his wife think too much. Someone sues God for sending too much rain. You draft the petition just to see if heaven answers. It doesn't. When they can't afford coin, clients pay in stories. You listen to them all. Tales of betrayal, hunger, pride, love gone wrong. By the end of each hearing, you know more about their chickens than their children. And yet, you can't help but feel sorry for them. Their faith in the law is touching. Misplaced, but touching. There's one client you'll never forget, a tanner named Hob. He's accused of poisoning a local pond with his dye runoff. The villagers claim their geese turned purple. Hob insists that's proof of divine blessing. You argue miraculous plumage isn't a recognized defense. The jury deliberates for 6 hours, which in village time means they went to the tavern. When they return, they declare Hob guilty, but fashionable. The fine, 2 silver coins, and a promise to switch to brown dye. You start to notice patterns. The guilty act calm, the innocent panic, and everyone swears on a saint they've never met. Trials are less about evidence and more about performance. Sometimes you win by eloquence, sometimes by pity, and sometimes because the judge wants to go home before supper. The peasants see you as a wizard who conjures verdicts out of words. The nobles see you as a servant who keeps their hands clean. Both pay late. Both expect miracles. One day, a blacksmith storms into your office demanding justice because his apprentice ran off with his hammer. You ask if he wants compensation. He says no, just the apprentice's hand. You clarify which one. He says, "Surprise me." You bring the case before the local bailiff, who suggests mediation. Mediation, in this context, means everyone shouting at once until someone gives up. In the end, the apprentice returns the hammer, the blacksmith forgives him, and you get paid in iron nails. You use them to hang your law degree, which is just a piece of parchment that says, "Stop asking." The truth is, most clients don't want justice. They want revenge with good grammar. You provide that. You give their rage footnotes and their grudges citations. It's oddly satisfying. Your worst clients are nobles. They speak in riddles, expect immunity, and treat facts as personal attacks. A baron once hires you to defend him against accusations of witchcraft. You ask what evidence they have. He says, "My enemies float." You rest your case early. The wealthy often settle cases by throwing banquets. You've attended more peace feasts than actual victories. By the end of each, someone insults someone's cousin, a duel breaks out, and you have 5 new clients by dessert. It's efficient in a depressing way. Sometimes you envy the simpler trades. A baker knows when he's done his job, the bread rises. A blacksmith knows when he's succeeded, the metal bends. A lawyer never knows. Half your victories feel like losses written in fancy handwriting. You find small joys where you can. The warmth of candle wax on your hands, the sound of quills scratching in rhythm, the brief silence when a judge actually listens. These moments are rare, but they keep you from bolting for the countryside and pretending to be a shepherd. Your apprentices ask if you ever get tired of listening to complaints. You tell them, "No, it's the silence after that's dangerous." They laugh. You don't. Late one night, you sit alone in your chamber surrounded by piles of parchment. The walls seem to lean inward under the weight of unsolved grievances. You realize that every case you've ever won or lost is already forgotten by the people who begged for help. But you remember them all. That's the curse of lawyers. Perfect memory, no closure. Outside, the bells toll midnight. Another day of disputes ends. You snuff your candle, stretch your aching hands, and whisper to the darkness, "Case dismissed. For now." Winter creeps into London like a cold accusation. The air turns sharp enough to cut parchment, and every breath fogs like confession smoke. You spend your mornings watching your ink freeze before it hits the page. At least, that's your excuse for the growing pile of unfinished work. Paperwork never sleeps, even when you wish it would. Each case demands 3 copies, sealed and countersigned by men who can't spell their own names. You once spent an entire day writing "heretofore" and realized it no longer sounded like a real word. The royal courts adore documentation. If the Almighty ever returns to Earth, he'll be asked to submit evidence in triplicate. The process is simple. First, you write a petition, then a counter-petition, then a memorandum explaining why the first 2 exist. The result is a legal ecosystem where every scroll gives birth to 2 more. It's parchment reproduction, immaculate conception by bureaucracy. You've started measuring your life in sheets of vellum. Each one costs nearly a shilling, and the soul of a sheep. You sometimes imagine their ghosts watching you from the rafters, unimpressed by your arguments. Scribes make fortunes while lawyers go broke, buying ink. The best scribes work in candlelit cellars, coughing gently into the margins. Their handwriting is so precise, it could be used to cut glass. Your own looks like a drunk monk fell asleep mid-gospel. Every document requires flourishes, loops, curls, and decorative saints drawn in the corners. You can't submit anything plain, or the clerks reject it for lack of majesty. Justice, apparently, needs good penmanship. When your quills wear down, you sharpen them with your teeth. Your apprentices copy you, believing it's a ritual. You let them believe it. A sense of mystique makes up for a lack of salary. The smell of ink seeps into everything. Your hair, your clothes, even your dreams. You wake some nights convinced you've signed something in your sleep. You probably have. One evening, you're ordered to compile the year's royal decrees. There are over 200. By the time you finish, your hands look like you've strangled a squid. You hold them up to the firelight and laugh until your lungs ache. A visiting notary from France watches you work and says, "In Paris, they use clerks for this." You tell him, "In London, we use suffering." He nods respectfully. The clerks, of course, are no better off. They sleep on benches beside the archives, dreaming in legal Latin. One of them, a cheerful man named Robert, once told you he's seen parchment burst into flames from overuse. You didn't believe him until you saw smoke curling from the king's tax ledgers last month. To prevent fires, you're told to keep the stacks damp. This means half your documents now smell like a fish market. The other half rot quietly in the corner, turning justice into compost. Sometimes you fantasize about throwing it all into the Thames, watching the river carry away centuries of disputes, one soggy scroll at a time. You picture monks diving after them, yelling, "Jurisdiction," as they sink. The irony is that no one ever reads most of it. The archives swallow each ruling whole, never to be seen again. You could write, "All cats are hereby noblemen," and it would take decades for anyone to notice. Once, a clerk misfiled a decree declaring all Mondays to be holy days. The city accidentally shut down for a month. When corrected, no one apologized. They simply filed the correction under Tuesday. Even royal orders get lost. One writ commanding peace in the north somehow ended up as a grocery list in Kent. Another vanished entirely, replaced by a doodle of what looks suspiciously like a cat wearing a crown. You admire whoever did it. That's art. The more documents you write, the less you trust words. They twist, fade, and vanish faster than truth. You begin to suspect the only real law is gravity, and even that feels negotiable. Still, you keep going. Every morning, you dip your quill into a pot of black promise and start again. You tell yourself the next sentence will matter. It rarely does. On one particularly bleak afternoon, your apprentice asks why the law needs so many copies. You say, "Because someday one might survive the fire. He nods, then accidentally drops a candle. You save the scrolls, but lose half your sleeve. For the rest of the week, your arm smells faintly of roasted wool. Justice is delicious, apparently. When the weather finally breaks, you open the shutters and let the cold air in. It feels like proof that the world outside still exists. A reminder that the law is only a shadow of life, not the other way around. For a moment, you let yourself imagine quitting, becoming a fisherman, a mason, anything that doesn't require calligraphy and guilt. But then you glance at the pile of parchment and sigh. The work won't write itself. Besides, if it did, it will probably sue you for credit. So you sit down again, dip your quill, and start drafting another decree about oxen trespassing. The ink flows, the candle burns, and the endless hum of bureaucracy fills the room like prayer. You whisper, "In the name of order, Amen," and begin your next sentence. By early spring, you've stopped pretending the system makes sense. It doesn't. But at least now, you can predict its nonsense with professional accuracy. You've been called to Westminster for a nobleman's trial, a grand affair rumored to involve scandal, treason, and possibly goats. The streets are lined with gawkers. Even the rats have come to watch. Inside, the air feels heavy with perfume, dust, and quiet dread. The accused sits on a dais, wrapped in fur, staring straight ahead, like he's already been carved into a cautionary tale. You're not his lawyer, thank heaven. You're just there to observe on behalf of the guild. But even as an observer, you can feel the tension. A sort of humming moral nausea that sticks to your robes. The prosecution is led by Sir Geoffrey, a man who treats outrage like it's a sacred calling. He opens with a 30-minute speech about the sanctity of oaths, the duty of nobles, and the divine consequences of wearing fur in June. By the end, even the accused looks confused. Your attention drifts to the spectators, merchants whispering bets, priests pretending not to enjoy the drama, one scribe furiously sketching the proceedings like it's a jousting match. It occurs to you that trials aren't about truth, they're about audience retention. The defense finally stands. He's a short man with an expression that suggests he's halfway through losing both his patience and his mind. He begins with, "My lord, the charges are grave, but the evidence is mostly goats." You almost applaud. The witnesses are worse. One claims he saw the accused consorting with foreigners. Another says he spoke ill of the king's pigeons. A third admits he doesn't know what treason is, but suspects it involves bread. You've never seen perjury performed with such enthusiasm. The court erupts in arguments, accusations, and the occasional prayer. Every man in the room believes himself the voice of reason, which is always the first sign of catastrophe. At one point, the bishop rises to remind everyone that sin, not goats, is the real enemy. Then someone produces a goat as evidence. The goat eats the bishop's notes. By sunset, no verdict has been reached. The judges adjourn, claiming divine guidance requires a good night's sleep. The nobleman is escorted back to his cell. The goat stays in court as a temporary guardian of the evidence. You walk home through the fog, wondering how many lives are decided by confusion instead of conviction. How many verdicts are just paperwork wrapped in perfume? The next morning, you're summoned to assist with drafting the official record of the trial. This means translating 12 hours of shouting into something that sounds dignified. You summarize. Both sides presented compelling nonsense. Verdict pending divine mood. No one objects. Days pass. Rumors multiply. The nobleman is said to have bribed a guard, cursed a bishop, and proposed to the judge's niece. Only the last one is true. When the verdict finally comes, it's delivered in a whisper. The accused is pardoned in light of partial ignorance. Everyone cheers like they've witnessed mercy. You clap too, though you're not sure why. Afterward, you find Sir Geoffrey in the tavern, red-faced and victorious anyway. He insists justice was served. You ask, to whom? He doesn't answer. He just raises his mug and toasts the majesty of law. You drink with him, because refusing would be treason. In the weeks that follow, you handle smaller cases again. Stolen candles, unpaid debts, accidental arson during Lent. Each one feels trivial compared to the nobleman's spectacle, but you start to notice something the grand trials never show. Small justice. Quiet, unrecorded fairness that sneaks in when no one's watching. An apprentice wins his first case, defending a fishmonger accused of shorting a bishop on cod. A widow recovers her lost dowry after 20 years. A blind beggar's fine is dismissed because the judge, for once, listens. None of it makes headlines, but it makes the work bearable. Late one evening, while packing up your papers, you find an old document from your earliest days, your first official petition. It's childish, overwritten, and full of phrases you'd never use now. At the bottom, in shaky ink, you'd written, "Let the truth be seen." You laugh softly. Back then, you still believed the law had eyes. You slip the parchment into the fire and watch it curl into ash. It feels lighter than you remember. Maybe that's progress. Or maybe it's just paper finally giving up. Outside, the bells of Westminster ring for evening prayer. You close your eyes and listen. For the first time in years, you don't think about verdicts or fees or goats. You just breathe. And in that quiet moment, the law almost sounds like peace. By the spring of 1381, London feels different. The air hums with the sound of sermons and sharpening blades. Even the pigeons look political. Rumors drift through the streets, talk of peasants marching, of taxes raised, of justice long overdue. The city watches and waits, holding its breath like a witness afraid to speak. You try to ignore it. You bury yourself in parchment and preambles, pretending rebellion is just another rumor. But then you hear the bells. Not the slow, holy kind, the urgent kind, the kind that say, everything you thought was stable is about to be cross-examined. When the crowds finally arrive, it's not an army. It's a sea of exhaustion given shape. Farmers, masons, servants, people who've spent their lives paying fees to keep existing. They don't shout for the king. They shout for fairness, which in this city is considered treason. You watch from your window as the mob floods Westminster. Scrolls are ripped apart, seals shattered, names burned from record books. It's strange. The sound of injustice dying isn't silence, it's paper tearing. Your instinct is to hide, but some reckless part of you steps outside. The streets are smoke and voices, the air thick with centuries of unpaid debt. You see faces you recognize, clients, clerks, even a judge's cook, all shouting the same word: enough. You make your way toward Westminster Hall. Inside, the great benches are overturned, and the royal crest lies face down in the mud. A boy is dancing on it, laughing like someone who's never had to write a petition. Among the chaos, you find an old man you know, Lord Halford, once a formidable jurist. Now he's slumped against the wall, pale as wax, clutching a stack of letters. He motions for you to come closer. Do you still believe in the law? He asks. You open your mouth, but nothing comes out. Finally, you say, I believe it believes in itself. He smiles, the kind of smile that forgives and condemns at the same time. He gestures weakly to the letters in his lap. Their apologies, he whispers, to men I wronged, to verdicts I regret. Things I should have said before my ink ran dry. You open one. It's addressed to a farmer in Kent. It reads, I knew you were innocent. I was just tired. You close it gently. Exhaustion, you think, has always been the kingdom's quietest executioner. Another letter lies open. It's addressed to the future. You read it aloud. When law forgets mercy, it becomes arithmetic. Halford nods. Burn them, he murmurs. Let the truth rise without footnotes. You hesitate, then do as he asks. The parchment curls in the fire, the ink glowing briefly like repentance made visible. When it's done, he exhales once and goes still. You whisper, court adjourned. No one hears you but the flames. Outside, the uprising surges and falters. By dusk, soldiers reclaim the city. The rebels scatter like frightened thoughts. The law, battered but breathing, drags itself upright and declares victory. You walk through the ruins of Westminster, parchment crunching underfoot. Smoke hangs over everything like unspoken guilt. You find one scrap that escaped the fire, half a Latin phrase. Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. You roll it between your fingers and keep it, a relic of sincerity in a system allergic to it. Weeks pass. London repairs itself the way all cities do, by pretending nothing happened. New laws are drafted to replace the old ones, written in the same hand, with slightly cleaner ink. The machine grinds on, as it always does. You return to your work. Your quill moves slower now. Your parchment piles smaller. The noise of the courts feels different, like a sermon half believed. Sometimes, when you're alone at night, you still hear the chant from that day echoing in your ears. Enough. You whisper it back, softly, like a prayer you're not supposed to know. Your apprentices ask what the rebellion was really about. You tell them it was about taxes. You don't tell them it was about hope. Hope doesn't bill by the hour. Years later, you retire with a modest pension and an immodest collection of ink stains. People call you wise. You suspect they mean tired. You still write, sometimes, not petitions or contracts, letters you'll never send, small apologies, private verdicts. You keep them in a drawer just to prove the law hasn't entirely consumed your soul. One night, you take out that scrap of Latin again. You trace the letters with your thumb. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Then you smile. Or at least, you whisper. Let someone write it down properly this time. Outside, the bells of London toll once more. You can't tell if they're marking dawn or morning. Maybe both. You rise, blow out the last candle, and the darkness feels honest. Tomorrow, the courts will open again. The scribes will copy, the nobles will argue, and the same old machine will hum to life. But somewhere, between ink and conscience, a few words might still mean something. Softly, politely, in perfect Latin. Medieval tavern culture, ale, dice, and very bad music. You push open the tavern door and it hits you. The smell of ale, smoke, and moral surrender. Inside, light leaks through warped shutters and the floorboards hum beneath 100 muddy boots. This is not a temple, not a market, not even a home. It's something far more sacred, a place to forget everything for the price of a pint. It's late in the 13th century, somewhere between a plague and a tax increase. You've finished another week of honest suffering, and your throat feels as dry as confession parchment. The sign above the door swings in the wind. A crude painting of a barrel, a horse, and what might be a man vomiting. That's the medieval word for welcome. Inside, the noise hits like weather. Laughter, dice, arguments about saints, the creak of wooden cups, a lute that's at war with its own strings. The air tastes of barley and regret. You take a breath and feel your worries dissolve into someone else's. There are 3 kinds of drinking houses in this century: inns, alehouses, and taverns. Inns are for travelers, alehouses are for everyone, and taverns are where both groups end up when the beer runs out. You're in the last category, the kind of establishment where the line between prayer and profanity blurs by the second drink. The landlord eyes you suspiciously, as landlords have since the dawn of commerce. He's a man of generous belly and limited patience, wearing the expression of someone who knows that every customer is a potential thief, sinner, or poet, sometimes all 3. You slide him a coin. He bites it, shrugs, and fills your cup from a barrel marked only with an X, which probably means strong enough to forget your name. The ale is warm, cloudy, and alive in a way that water never is. Water kills people. Beer keeps them busy. It's brewed mostly by women, alewives, who run the industry while pretending not to. They mash barley in big wooden tubs, stir it with paddles, and test the strength by how long a fly can survive on the surface. 2 seconds, weak, 10, perfect. You spot one of those alewives now, sleeves rolled, face fierce, hair tucked under a linen cap. She's carrying 2 barrels at once like they're gossip. She can't wait to deliver. The men make jokes until she looks at them. Then they remember their mortality. In the corner, a group of peasants sit shoulder to shoulder. They're arguing about the weather, which means the crops, which means God. It always comes back to God. One insists the rain is punishment, another says it's a sign of blessing, and a third just wants his turn at the dice. The dice clatter on the table like bones predicting destiny. It's a mix of gambling and theology. You roll, you lose, and you ask what lesson the Lord intended. Sometimes the answer is, stop betting your rent. A bard begins to sing. He's missing 2 strings and most of his dignity, but the crowd cheers anyway. His song is about a knight who mistakes a laundry maid for a princess and never recovers. Everyone knows it's a true story. In the back corner, a priest drinks with a gravedigger. It's not a joke, just Tuesday. The priest claims ale is part of God's plan because Noah brought wine on the ark. The gravedigger says that explains the crash. They both laugh, then order another round. You nurse your drink and watch humanity unfold in miniature. A young couple flirts clumsily near the hearth. An old soldier brags about battles that might not have happened. A merchant counts coins as though they might multiply if stared at long enough. Every class of society is represented badly. The food is questionable but hearty. There's pottage, a stew that's been boiling since Easter, and trenchers, stale bread used as plates until they dissolve into soup. Some swear the taste improves with mold. You take their word for it. At another table, a bailiff is pretending he doesn't see the tax collector he owes money to. They're separated by 3 feet and a barrel of ale, which is enough distance for civility. The tavern is also the local post office, rumor mill, and dating service. If you want to know who's getting married, arrested, or excommunicated, this is where you come. News travels from mouth to mug to memory in under an hour. Half of it's false, all of it's entertaining. There's music, but music might be generous. A fiddler and a drum compete to see who can be more off-key. The song is about taxes disguised as love. You join the chorus anyway, because rhythm forgives everything. A scuffle breaks out, not a real fight, more of a loud disagreement involving elbows and philosophy. Someone claims ale is superior to wine. Someone else claims wine is holier because monks make it. The ale drinker points out that monks also make hangovers. The room votes in his favor. Fights in taverns are like thunderstorms, sudden, noisy, and usually over once everyone's wet. The watchmen only intervene if furniture flies. Otherwise, they let the crowd police itself. There's an unwritten rule: no swords, no stabbing, and no hitting the bard unless it improves the song. You find yourself talking to a miller who claims he once met the king. He didn't, but he describes the encounter in detail so vivid you almost believe him. That's the magic of taverns. Reality has the night off. The landlord refills mugs without asking. He knows every regular by sight, if not by debt. The rich drink to forget their sins. The poor drink to remember they're human. Everyone leaves owing him something. Outside, the world sleeps uneasily. Inside, it hums. This is where revolts begin. Songs are born, and marriage proposals are regretted in advance. The tavern isn't just a building, it's the social engine of the Middle Ages. You hear someone bragging about inventing a new game, throwing knives at the landlord's sign after closing. The prize is not being banned for life. You make a note to watch from a safe distance. The alewife passes again, slamming tankards onto tables with mechanical grace. She runs the place more than the landlord does, and everyone knows it. There's talk of banning women brewers because they're too successful. The men proposing it have clearly never tried lifting a cask. At the back table, someone starts telling ghost stories. Everyone begins with, "It really happened." You listen to tales of monks haunting bridges, headless horses, and ale that refills itself. Clearly fiction, because no brewer would allow it. The smoke thickens. A child darts through the crowd, selling roasted chestnuts, shouting prices in a voice that could wake saints. He earns more than the fiddler. The fiddler doesn't notice. He's too busy proposing to the alewife again. She says she'll think about it in the next life. You overhear a scribe explaining that the crown wants to regulate alcohol. A collective groan follows. Someone mutters, "They'll have to find us first." Another replies, "We'll be right here." As midnight nears, the tavern transforms. The laughter turns slower, the song sadder, the talk softer. Drunken philosophy fills the gaps where reason once lived. "What is truth?" asks a tanner. "Whatever you can sing," answers the bard. There's an unspoken poetry to these hours. The poor man feels rich, the lonely feel known, and the weary find warmth in shared foolishness. The tavern is imperfect, chaotic, and sticky, but it's also home. Eventually, the landlord calls last rounds. No one obeys. A few pretend to leave, then circle back for one for the road, which is ironic because most roads end here. You step outside into the cool night. The moon hangs above the thatched roofs like a pale coin. From inside, the last chords of music fade into murmurs and hiccups. The air smells of ale, smoke, and something close to joy. A watchman strolls by and nods. He's been bribed, forgiven, or both. He carries a lantern and the weary patience of a man who's seen too many versions of the same evening. "Good night," he says. You answer, "Define good." Down the street, a rooster crows, confused, ambitious, and 2 hours early. Someone throws a shoe. Civilization endures. You walk home, past shuttered windows and puddles reflecting torchlight. Your boots squelch, your breath fogs, and your head swims pleasantly. Somewhere behind you, laughter breaks again, uncontainable, human. Tomorrow will be the same. Work, worry, church, and at sunset, the pull of the tavern door. Because no matter how grim the Middle Ages get, there's always room for a pint, a song, and a terrible idea. You glance back one last time. The sign creaks in the wind. Inside, someone starts a new verse. You smile because you know the refrain. It's the sound of people surviving. And as the night swallows the village, the tavern's laughter lingers. Warm, rough, endlessly human. The Middle Ages weren't built on stone or scripture. They were built on ale. Greek marketplace scandals, gossip at the Agora, 5th century BCE. The sun is barely up when Athens begins to talk. Not in speeches or decrees, those come later. It starts here, in the Agora, where the city wakes by arguing with itself. You walk downhill toward the marketplace, sandals sliding over white dust, the smell of olive oil and old fish thick in the morning air. A rooster crows somewhere behind you, late as usual. By the time you reach the square, half the city is already shouting. The Agora is everything at once: parliament, market, courthouse, rumor mill, and public therapy session. Marble stowers line the edges like respectable witnesses, while the real business happens in the dirt. Men with togas hitched high wade through stalls of figs, amphorae, gossip, and philosophy. A wine cellar waves you over before you can even pretend to browse. He offers a cup on the house, which means on your future tab. The wine is half vinegar, half charm, but you nod approvingly. He leans closer, voice low. Have you heard what Pericles' wife said about the generals? You haven't, but you will, because in Athens, to exist within earshot is to be informed. He whispers the rumor with reverence, like a priest delivering confession. By the end, you know more about the private lives of the ruling class than their laws. The gossip web stretches from stall to stall like invisible silk. A fishmonger hears it from a potter. The potter heard it from his cousin's neighbor's slave. By the time the story reaches you, it's evolved 3 new subplots and a moral lesson about hubris. You pass a table stacked with figs. The vendor swears they're blessed by Demeter herself. Behind her, a rival scoffs and mutters, "She bribed the priest." Competition here isn't just about prices. It's about reputations, divine and otherwise. The smell of fresh bread pulls you toward a baker's stall. He's kneading dough with one hand and gesturing wildly with the other, recounting how a senator fainted at yesterday's assembly after mixing wine with onions. The customers laugh and buy twice as much bread. Scandal, it seems, pairs well with carbs. In the middle of the square stands a philosopher preaching virtue. He's barefoot, unwashed, and loudly condemning greed while keeping one hand on his coin pouch. A group of teenagers heckle him by asking if wisdom pays taxes. He says yes, in enlightenment. They throw olives. You wander past the money changers' tables, where silver drachmas clink like gossip itself, small, sharp, and contagious. A foreign trader from Corinth is arguing about exchange rates in a language half Greek, half profanity. The clerk smiles serenely and shortchanges him with divine precision. Near the fountain, women bargain for dyed cloth, their voices slicing through the air like seagulls. They gossip too, not about politics, but about philosophers who flirt poorly and husbands who quote Homer during dinner. It's the same social order, just better written. A herald pushes through the crowd, shouting a new decree. All citizens must attend tomorrow's assembly to vote on grain tariffs. No one listens. Someone asks if there will be free wine. The herald sighs and keeps walking. You stop to watch a scribe at work, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, writing letters for hire. He's ghostwriting apologies, love notes, and one very ambitious poem about hemorrhoids. Literacy in Athens is a business model. A barber next door has turned his shop into a rumor exchange. Men sit under bronze mirrors discussing everything from shipwrecks to scandals. He trims hair and adds embellishments to every story. If you need news faster than Hermes, ask your barber. The heat climbs, flies gather. The marketplace buzzes with the energy of a city that believes conversation is a civic duty. You could measure Athenian freedom in decibels. An old potter greets you from behind cracked jars and starts a story without invitation. Apparently, the playwright Euripides was booed off stage for writing a tragedy where everyone survives. Too unrealistic, the potter says, spitting into clay. Tragedy sells better when the audience weeps and buys vases after. A priest from Delphi passes through, gathering donations for temple repairs. He's followed by a boy carrying a basket labeled official relics. Inside are pebbles allegedly kissed by Apollo. They sell out within the hour. You admire the marketing. Across the square, two citizens argue over whether democracy can survive another war. One quotes philosophers, the other quotes his mother. Neither convinces the other, but both leave feeling victorious, which is the essence of politics. You rest in the shade of the Stoa of Zeus, where veterans and philosophers share benches. A Socratic discussion unfolds nearby, beginning with, "What is courage?" and ending with, "Who spilled my wine?" You realize philosophy is just gossip that's learned Latin later. Lunch arrives in the form of chaos. Vendors shout, pigeons invade, and the fishmongers beat scales off their wares like drum. A minstrel sings a love song about Helen of Troy that somehow includes 3 food puns and a tax complaint. The crowd applauds. Comedy survives everything. As you eat olives and bread, 2 men debate whether the Spartan navy actually exists or is just Athenian propaganda. Someone bets on it. Someone else writes a play about it. That's Athens. Every rumor eventually becomes art. Afternoon, the sun turns cruel. Citizens seek shade, but gossip doesn't rest. A woman carrying amphorae of oil whispers that Pericles' new decree bans purple robes for anyone under the rank of general. A tailor overhears and triples his price for undyed linen. Economics in action. A crowd gathers at a sculptor's booth. He's unveiling a small marble bust of a politician who died last week. Maybe. Some swear they saw him buying olives yesterday. The sculptor shrugs and says, "Dead or alive, he's good for business." You stop at a perfume stall where a woman in bright robes offers you a vial, favored by Aspasia herself. You ask if that's true. She smiles. Truth and fragrance both fade quickly. Why worry which is which? You buy 2. Across the square, a small brawl breaks out near the dice table. Someone accused someone of using loaded cubes. Someone else accused both of being Spartans. Within seconds, half the crowd is watching, offering legal advice and placing bets. The constable eventually intervenes, not to stop them, but to collect his cut. You wander past a display of imported goods from Egypt, papyrus scrolls, spices, strange trinkets shaped like cats. The merchant claims each is blessed by Ra himself. A philosopher mutters, "So was my laundry." The merchant doubles his price for philosophers. Everywhere you look, people are talking about wars, lovers, taxes, omens, poetry, and hairstyles. Athens doesn't just breathe air, it breathes rumor. Silence here feels suspicious. A traveling orator sets up on a crate, offering free speeches for anyone willing to listen. He begins with grand ideals, liberty, justice, glory, then slips seamlessly into promoting his cousin's pottery shop. Half the crowd buys pots. The other half claps like they've witnessed democracy at work. Nearby, a group of foreign traders from Ionia share wine and insults in equal measure. One complains that Athenian coins are too pretty to spend. Another says the women talk too loud. Both statements are true. As afternoon bleeds toward evening, the tone shifts. The gossip grows softer, more philosophical, as if the city itself is sobering. People talk about destiny, justice, whether the gods care, whether they ever did. You realize Athens doubts everything, except the need to keep talking. The market begins to close. Merchants tie their tents, count coins, and trade leftover bread for stories. A potter gives a vase to a bard in exchange for a flattering poem. By tomorrow, the story will circulate that the potter is a patron of the arts. In Athens, reputation is the only real currency. You linger near the fountain again as the shadows lengthen. The marble glows like honey. The air smells of dust and figs. A group of children chase each other between stalls, shouting nonsense that somehow sounds like politics. They're learning early. A priestess lights incense at the edge of the square. She prays for order, peace, and honest men. Even the philosophers smile at the joke. By dusk, the agora transforms. Merchants fade into shadows, dogs curl under tables, and the gossip slows to a murmur. The city's heartbeat at rest. You sit on a stone step, finishing the last of your wine, listening to Athens exhale. You think about how this noisy, ridiculous place holds everything that makes civilization possible. Trade, laughter, lies, curiosity. It's chaos, but it's organized chaos. Each rumor, each argument, each shouted price keeps the city alive. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, the philosophers will return, and the stories will mutate again. Some will be forgotten. Some will reach the ears of history, but all of them will start here, between the olives and the gossip, where democracy learned how to talk. You glance around one last time. The last merchant waves goodnight. A stray cat steals a fish head from an unattended basket. Somewhere, a voice calls out another rumor. Something about Alcibiades and a missing statue. You smile. Of course, history never stops talking. The strange economy of medieval relics. You can buy salvation in this century. It just comes wrapped in linen and labeled authentic. Welcome to the strange, booming business of medieval relics, where holiness meets marketing and every toenail tells a story. It's the year 1380, and Europe is crowded with saints. Not living ones, those are rare. These are the ones distributed in bits and pieces across 1,000 churches, each promising miracles, protection, and very generous donations. You've come to a bustling marketplace outside a cathedral. The bells are ringing, incense hangs in the air, and the crowd buzzes with the fervor of both faith and bargain hunting. If heaven has a waiting room, this is it, complete with merchants. On one side, a monk displays a bone in a glass vial. Finger of Saint Peter, he declares proudly. You squint. It looks like a chicken wing. He assures you that holiness cannot be judged by anatomy. Across from him, a rival merchant sells splinters from the true cross. He's got enough to rebuild Noah's Ark twice over. Pilgrims line up, clutching coins and hope in equal measure. Supply and demand have never been more spiritual. Relics are the original investment portfolios. Low risk, high reward, eternal dividends. A single lock of a saint's hair can fund a monastery for decades. Authenticity is optional. Belief does most of the work. You wander from stall to stall, overwhelmed by the inventory. There's the jawbone of John the Baptist, 2 of the Virgin Mary's shoes, and a vial of tears of the Magdalene. Someone even claims to sell the breath of St. Francis trapped in a bottle. You're tempted to ask for a demonstration. Every relic comes with paperwork, or at least parchment with suspicious Latin and an impressive-looking seal. These letters of authenticity are signed by bishops who may or may not exist. Forgery is a sin, yes, but apparently not a mortal one if the profits go to the church. The crowd around you is electric with belief. Peasants, nobles, merchants, all here for a taste of the divine. A woman presses a fragment of cloth to her forehead and swears her fever breaks instantly. The merchant nods wisely and raises the price. You find a stall selling holy dust, scooped directly from the tombs of saints, or possibly from a nearby road. The merchant swears it glows in the moonlight. You ask if it's safe to eat. He says it depends on your level of sin. Further down the line, a traveling friar offers something extraordinary, the feather of an angel. It's definitely from a goose, but his sales pitch could convert a skeptic. He says it fell during the Annunciation and was recovered by shepherds. You ask how much? He says, for faith, only 5 silver coins. Faith, it seems, is not free. The church officially discourages the sale of relics, of course, which is why nearly everyone involved calls it a donation. Money simply changes hands at the same time as the bone, purely by coincidence. Miraculously, no one seems confused by this arrangement. Inside the cathedral, the relics gleam under candlelight. Behind the altar, a golden reliquary houses a skull, maybe of Saint Ursula, maybe of someone named Ursula who died locally. The plaque is vague on purpose. Ambiguity sells better than certainty. Pilgrims drop to their knees, whispering prayers between sobs. The air hums with desperation, for healing, for forgiveness, for proof that all this suffering means something. You realize relics aren't just bones, they're emotional anchors for a world that keeps shifting beneath its people. A priest walks past with the confident stride of a man surrounded by profitable holiness. He's counting offerings, muttering blessings, and pretending not to hear the argument outside about which saint is better at curing headaches. Apparently, competition extends to heaven. You watch as a merchant from Flanders sets up shop with a relic that draws gasps, the milk of the Virgin Mary. It's kept in a crystal vial, milky white, suspiciously well preserved, for 1,300 years. He insists it never spoils. You wonder if he's tried sniffing it. Another peddler sells St. Lawrence's grill marks, little patches of charred linen said to have touched the martyr's famous roasting rack. He offers a discount if you buy 2. You decline. Your soul can only handle 1 miracle per payday. Not all relics are physical. A friar offers holy air collected during Easter Mass in Rome. He opens the bottle and waves it toward you like a blessing. You inhale reverently, mostly dust and disappointment. Pilgrimage tourism keeps the economy spinning. Every town wants its own saintly attraction. If your church doesn't have a relic, good luck attracting donations or pilgrims. A small monastery in Normandy once claimed to have the foreskin of Christ. A year later, 3 other monasteries did too. Mathematically impressive, theologically confusing. You overhear two monks whispering about relic smugglers, black market traders who move bones between kingdoms like contraband. Apparently, one Benedictine tried to sell St. Catherine's hand twice. When questioned, he said, she worked miracles with both. Even kings collect relics like trophies. Louis IX of France spent a fortune on the crown of thorns, a single purchase that cost more than the cathedral built to house it. Across Europe, monarchs flaunt their sacred collections like divine insurance policies. God favors the well-endowed reliquary. The line between faith and fraud is thin, but medieval people don't see it that way. A forged relic can still heal if belief is sincere. In a sense, the miracle isn't in the bone, it's in the buyer. Outside, the marketplace grows rowdy as sellers compete for attention. One rings a bell promising instant remission of sin with every purchase. Another boasts his relic cured a cow of demonic possession. The crowd applauds. Faith and entertainment have officially merged. A weary-looking pilgrim collapses near the fountain. People rush to help, pressing relics to his forehead like medieval first aid. He revives moments later. The sellers declare victory and raise their prices again. Miracle inflation. Even artisans profit. Goldsmiths craft elaborate containers, reliquaries shaped like arms, hearts, and whole bodies of saints rendered in miniature. Some glitter more than the bones inside. Pilgrims don't mind. Beauty feels like proof. The stories surrounding each relic grow richer with retelling. A lock of St. Agnes's hair now includes a subplot about angels and a thunderstorm. A fragment of St. George's lance doubles in size every year. At this rate, the saint will need a warehouse. Of course, the clergy isn't immune to temptation. A bishop in Germany once hosted an exhibition featuring the breath of the Holy Spirit, which turned out to be warm air blown through a pipe. Attendance was excellent. You pause near a humble stand run by a widow. She sells small wooden crosses carved from the Mount of Olives. They're plain, cheap, and not very miraculous. But her hands shake as she blesses each one, and her customers leave smiling anyway. Maybe that's the real miracle. A bell rings for Vespers, and the market begins to close. The monks pack their boxes of bones, careful not to mix saints. Cross-contamination could cause theological confusion. The crowd thins, leaving behind the scent of wax, incense, and ambition. You linger, watching the last rays of sunlight hit a gilded reliquary. It glows like liquid fire. For a moment, you understand why people believe so fiercely. In a world of famine, plague, and endless war, even a fake miracle is still hope, and hope sells fast. A friar joins you, his robe dusty, his smile faint. He says quietly, "Faith needs something to hold." You ask if that excuses the lies. He shrugs. God forgives the gullible. I'm not sure about the clever. As darkness settles, The merchants light candles and count their earnings. The pilgrims drift toward the cathedral steps to pray with lighter pockets and heavier hearts. Some will swear tomorrow that their ailments are gone. Others will come back next week for stronger relics. You start to leave but glance back once more. A small boy sneaks behind a stall, holding a broken piece of wood from the display. He presses it to his chest, eyes closed, whispering a prayer. The seller sees, sighs, and lets him keep it. The wind picks up, scattering candle smoke across the square. Somewhere, a bell tolls again, slow, solemn, forgiving. The marketplace fades into shadow, but the belief remains, stubborn as ever. You realize the relic trade isn't just about greed. It's about humans trying to touch the untouchable, to buy certainty in a world that offers none. It's messy, absurd, occasionally fraudulent, and profoundly human. Tomorrow, new relics will appear. More saints, more miracles, more stories. And people will keep coming, coins in hand, hearts open, hoping this time the bone will glow a little brighter. Because in the Middle Ages, faith is the one commodity that never loses value. You walk away through the quiet streets, past shuttered shops and flickering lamps. The bells keep echoing long after they stop ringing. You can't tell if it's holiness or habit, but it feels sacred either way.